Pete, I must tell you that the other topics that we spoke about before were rather easy to put together. This one has challenged me in the extreme, because one so glibly uses this idea of forgiveness, and we throw the term around a lot, but this has sort of forced me to think about what it is and what context it fits in, and how it has general sort of applicability and stuff. And I suppose the easiest way to unravel this whole thing about forgiveness is to start off by sketching a scenario. And domestic settings are probably the place where spats happen most often, and
Yeah.
where aggrieved parties and sort of seek it out. So let's set the scene. Let's say that there's some domestic spat over something. Let's say of the two people who live together in the same environment, one's a little lazier than the others, and there comes about this sense of unfairness. And yeah, I'm doing all the work, I'm doing all the dishes, I'm making the food, I'm making the beds, and you're the lazy bugger, and you do absolutely nothing. And the spat ensues. And then once this is brought out into the open, and a good, robust adult discussion is had about it, let's say, well, let's label these two parties. Let's call the one the aggressed and the other the aggressor, or the transgressed or the transgressor. So the aggressed sort of has this case, puts this case forward, mentions all of the stuff, lists all the unfairness, and then the aggressor or the transgressor says, oops, didn't quite realize that. You're actually right. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I'll make an effort. Let's see if I can make this right. And it would require the aggressed then to say, okay, I accept your apology. Let's move forward. I forgive you. Let's reboot, start all over again, see where we go with this. So it seems as if we need a couple of prerequisites here for forgiveness to happen. We see in our little example that there is an acknowledgement of what went wrong by the transgressor. An acknowledgement is necessary. That person needs to have a little light bulb moment, come to the idea that, oops, I did make a mistake. This is a little bit unfair. Let me see if I can make this right. So there's a sort of second element to this. The first is the realization that something went wrong. Maybe an apology is necessary. The second thing is that one needs to learn from the mistake, try a concerted effort to bring about some kind of change. And then one can, on the basis of that, say, oops, look, I made a mistake. Can you forgive me? I don't quite still know what forgiveness really means in this context, but those might be prerequisites that need to be established on the transgressor's part in order for forgiveness to open up the opportunity for forgiveness. It takes quite a magnanimous person on the other side to say, okay, it seems like you're making an effort. Seems like there's some acknowledgement of the error, and so I can, in all good faith, say I will trust you to carry out this change that you promised, and so therefore I can forgive you. But for me to forgive you, what I do need to do is I do need to, as the aggressed or the transgressed, I need to sort of set this aside. One can't carry this damn thing into the future and keep bludgeoning the other person to death with this. You've got to let it go somewhere. I doubt that we want to forget it, but I think we want to let it go. So this idea of forgiveness applies to both parties, Pete, and it applies to the person who's ready to make the change. And it is also a statement of good faith, I think, by the person who was aggressed or transgressed, to say, look, I'm happy to accept your apology in good faith, with good trust, understand that you're going to attempt to make a difference here, and I will let this go, and I'll let it go for good, until, of course, you go make the blups again. Then I'm entitled to dredge it up all over again. The little example that I used is quite a benign example. Things tend to be a little bit more, they come to more of us as like infidelity in a relationship or stuff like that. How do you find it within your heart to actually forgive what the other person does when you yourself feel so marginalized, so neglected in this, that you feel as though you're not good enough, that you haven't been good enough for your partner, and that your partner may have needed to go out there and find something else outside of the confines of the committed relationship. And then forgiveness becomes a lot more difficult to seek and a lot more difficult to give. I pondered with the idea if forgiveness is about absolution. Is this about absolving that transgression? And I'm not so sure. One thing I do know is that no matter what the, pardon me, what the prerequisites are for this, but on both sides, there's need to acknowledge, to accept change, to want to drive change in a positive way, to rehabilitate one's behavior, and also the magnanimous setting aside of the past by the aggressed. No matter how this sort of works out, one needs to understand that forgiveness is perhaps this absolution of guilt in this kind of context. And I was kind of looking at this and thinking, is this all that forgiveness is really about? To my mind, I think if I had to create a definition for forgiveness, it is a social, because there's a social thing, it's not a legal thing, it's a social error correction mechanism. Its endeavor, its purpose is to reestablish balance and to reestablish trust. I don't know if you agree with me, but I think if I try to pull it all together, that's kind of where it fits in the bigger picture. However, when one comes to understand forgiveness in that context, we see that there are exceptional cases of forgiveness where these prerequisites are never met. I mean, I've heard in the news, and I've had one or two clients who've had terrible tragedies happen to them. One of my clients long ago, a couple of years ago, had some drunk drive into their vehicle. It killed her husband and her two kids. And this guy was up in court on manslaughter charges. And the press interviewed her, and she said, "All I have left is to forgive this guy, and I do so unconditionally." And the question was, why would you forgive him? How do you find it within your heart to make this exceptional statement? And do you actually truly forgive that person, or do you harbor grudges forever? And I think in this context, there's something special about that, because the transgressor in that negligent or criminal activity may not have the intention of correcting their ways. That person may have no remorse or regret about what they did. I can't say. But it's possible that they may say, well, look, that's just the way it worked. That's the way the cookie crumbles. I've taken the punch on the chin. I'm locked up in jail for a while now. And when I get back out, maybe I'm not going to be rehabilitated. I'm just going to go back to these criminal activities of mine anyway. And so it sort of puts into question, or puts under the spotlight, my definition of what forgiveness is as an error correction mechanism. It sort of brings that into question. Can one correct this unilaterally? And what was the purpose of this poor woman and many, many others like her who unilaterally make this gesture of forgiveness? What is their intention towards the other person, and what is their intention for themselves? And I suppose a person has, I've never been in such anguish or grief in my life, and I hope not to be there, but I suppose it would be quite a huge statement to make if ever I was in a predicament like that for myself. I have a choice. My choice is to go forward with opening up some measure of freedom in my life, so that and if I can let this go past, if I can let go of this, it's a statement of letting go. It's almost a declaration of, I am not going to be encumbered by this. I'm not going to be weighed down or entrapped by this. I'm not going to carry vengeance or remorse or retribution with me into the future. I'm letting it go. It is my statement to myself that I'm moving through this, and I have the means and the mechanism to pick up the pieces of life and to move into my future. And in so doing, Pete, I set you free as the aggressor, as the transgressor. I don't want to have anything more to do with you. I suppose, in a sense, it is a statement to you that you have to take ownership of this, the responsibility of this, the conscience and the fallout from this, and that I cannot hold that place for you. I'm not going to hold this by entrapping myself. I'm going to separate from you, offer you that freedom. You need to carry, if there's such a thing as karma, let's use it in a loose sense. You have to carry the karma of this, the responsibility and onus of this. And I'm not. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to pick up the pieces of life and get on with it. I think very few people can do that. I think a lot of people just get themselves so completely hooked in this that they can never, ever let this go. And it doesn't even need to be something as tragic as losing your kids in a car accident, in a drink drive car accident like that. Even in relationships where relationships break up due to infidelity, people carry this with them forever. And there may be no remorse from the other person. The other person may well say, look, this relationship's not working. I have to move on. My heart is entangled with somebody new. I have to start a new life. May you find peace. Goodbye. I'm moving on. And the other person, the aggrieved, sits with us and cannot move on because they can't let go of their own baggage. It's so nuanced, this. When I knew that I was talking on this subject, it's been in the back of my mind, I cannot tell you for how many weeks now, trying to come to terms with all of this and what this really means in so many different ways. And I think it is an error correction mechanism, but I think I have to add a caveat to that, that it is an error correction mechanism that is predominantly for me, not so much for the other person. If I can let it go, I set myself free from this, I can move through this experience, I can take the wisdom from it, and I can move into a new space. You know, Pete, we've said this before on other webinars here. We don't really have the opportunity to gain wisdom from the easy things in life. We gain wisdom from the tough experiences that we have to face. Those big challenges, those big things that push us to the extreme, to the limit of what we're able to cope with as human beings. Out of that, we either find a toxic, self-deprivating mix of beliefs that bring us to our end, to our misery, or in that we find some liberating, enlightening wisdom that allows us to transcend this difficult state in life. And I think, in a way, wisdom is that forgiveness is that error-correcting mechanism that allows us to choose the latter rather than the former. To say, I'm done with this, I'm moving through, it's my declaration of moving through this and coming into some new space. So having said that, I came across, some while back, I came across a Polynesian practice. It's a practice that was in the past extensively used in those Polynesian sort of islands around Hawaii and down Fiji and all of them. And this is a practice, if anyone wants to sort of look at it a little bit more, because it's quite an interesting twist on forgiveness. It is a Polynesian practice that goes under the name of Ha'oponopono. If you just Google it, you'll find it, no matter how you spell it. Ha'oponopono. and it sort of pops up there. But it came back into favor because there was a change. I don't know if this is an apocryphal story or a real story, but it seems like some people in the know are aware of this story. It came about because of its use in modern day correctional services in Hawaii. There's a penitentiary there that has some really hardened criminals in it, and there is a resident psychotherapist whose job it is to kind of work with all of these inmates and keep peace, law and order, and as far as possible to rehabilitate them so that they can be reintegrated into society. And person after person has failed because the kind of nutcases they've got in this prison are really hard nuts to crack. And so these psychotherapists just get exasperated and they walk away and they go somewhere else where it's easier to make a living. So this one guy came in and he, as the story goes, he said, I want the freedom to be able to use whatever mechanisms I can in order to bring about a change in this penitentiary. Would you allow me to do it? And they said yes. Nothing's worked so far, so long as it's not illegal, you have carte blanche to try something out. And what he did, he used an implementation, a version of this Ha'oponopono Polynesian practice, and as I say, its core is around forgiveness. And the way, ostensibly, that he did it is he took all the inmates' files and he placed them up on a rack, like you would have a magazine rack in a coffee shop. He placed all of these files, these dossiers, on this rack, and he had opened each of the dossiers to the person's picture, to the portrait picture. And he would go along this line of files, talking to each of those inmates in turn. And what he would say to each of the inmates are the 4 statements that are core to this Polynesian practice. The first statement is, forgive. I'm sorry, I love you, and thank you. Those are the 4 elements. Now they sound like very easy things to say. But that's they don't ring true. They seem to have a quirkiness about them. Why should this psychotherapist be standing there looking at the hardened criminal who has done something to society and look at this person's photograph and with all sincerity offer the statement of forgive me? You, the criminal, must forgive me, the psychotherapist. How does that work? That just doesn't make sense. Or I'm sorry, as the therapist, I'm sorry, or I love you, or thank you. This just doesn't make sense. And if we pull that back into that example that we used of, let's say there was some infidelity in a relationship, in a committed relationship, and it's come to a head, and the aggrieved, the transgressed, offers this Polynesian practice, this Polynesian offering, if you like, of forgiveness to the transgressor. How does the person being cheated upon say to the cheater, forgive me? Where does that find context? Or I'm sorry, or thank you, or I love you. And it's only when you sort of dig into this a little deeper and you see that this is a statement about wisdom and about learning, and that it only then starts to make some kind of sense. We go back to that idea that we only get our best wisdom from the toughest of experiences in life. And we want to mine that wisdom out of it so that we can free ourselves and move on in life. Then this Polynesian practice makes a little bit more sense. And let's put it back in the context of the partners in a broken relationship, in a fractured relationship. The aggrieved party, if that party says, forgive me for being a slow learner, for it is only through this experience that I'm able to find this wisdom, then it makes a little bit more sense. If you add the caveat to the end of that statement, then it makes a little bit more sense. This is almost like, sorry that I haven't learned this wisdom some other way, because if I had learned this wisdom some other way, I wouldn't have had to sort of inveigle you in this experience. I wouldn't have had, it takes 2 to tango. I wouldn't have had you as a partner in this experience. I'm sorry that I needed you to participate in this event so that I could have the opportunity to get this specific learning. That's what's meant by this Polynesian practice. And then I love you as I would love any other teacher of mine, because only through this curriculum, this experience with you as my teacher, am I able to gain this insight and this specific wisdom. And then lastly, thank you for being my teacher. Sure, that's a tough one. Yeah, I don't know that I could easily, in a context like that, just like flick this out and say, fine, I'm done. Thank you for the teaching. You are my teacher. May you find peace. Off you go. Cheers. I'm going to pick up the pieces and move on. It's a really, really tough one. And it sort of challenges the definition, our previous definition of what forgiveness is. So much, so good. This is all about people. Then just the other day when I was thinking about this webinar, and I was thinking of this for BB&D and corporations in general, another thought crossed my mind, and that has left me kind of perplexed over the last few days. And that is there any place in the corporate workspace, in corporate society, for forgiveness? It's all very well for people to forgive each other and to accept forgiveness, to ask for forgiveness, to magnanimously give forgiveness. But what happens in a corporation? This is a business. And I kind of racked my brains. Isn't forgiveness opening up the doorway for chaos in a business? Don't you open up your space to undisciplined, unruly, anything goes kind of work environment, you know? After all, a business is there to conduct a business practice in order to make profit, to be profitable, and one needs to sort of, all the employees need to toe the line a little bit, and surely you can't go soft and be soft-hearted when dealing with the responsibility of what a business calls for. And yet, perhaps there's a place for allowing mistakes to happen and to accept those mistakes and to forgive those mistakes if it is in a context of allowing and encouraging creativity and innovation, because the whole learning process is an iterative one after all, and mistakes are bound to happen in an iterative process, one where innovation is part of the equation. So is there a context, and I don't know the answer for this, but it's an interesting question. Is there a context for some form of error correction mechanism, call it forgiveness, but under a new definition, under a new banner, in the corporate workspace, where one allows people to, for the sake of innovation and freedom to test and to bring about new ideas and fresh blood in a business? Is there a context for that in a business? And how, because one would have to balance this kind of forgiveness, if this is the right word, and I'm not sure that it is the right word, how do we find balance between this and discipline? Because if you just let go all discipline, there's no responsibility, no accountability, people pull the ring out of it, and they'll go towards doing the least amount of work for the maximum reward, a work to rule kind of mentality. And so somewhere in the business, one has to kind of draw a line, find a midpoint somewhere, allow innovation to happen, because too much workplace, too much discipline is going to stifle creativity and innovation. How, and I just want to leave it here, how on earth in a business does the business itself find a balance between these two?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, it is a complex subject, and as you say, it depends on your view of it. And see, somebody just spelled Ha'oponopono for us. Yeah, so we've got it's been written there in the chat. And yeah, so I had some thoughts while you were chatting. The one you mentioned about before you got to the Ha'oponopono thing about the person doing the forgiving in your example of the accident is the person that's doing it because they're getting rid of a burden, which I think is probably one of the reasons for doing forgiveness. I agree with you on that. And but I was thinking as well, though, that sometimes in some situations, especially like in a situation where there's two parties that respect each other, and in whatever context you want to put it, and then the one party, genuinely says they're sorry, which is intrinsically asking for forgiveness, as opposed to the kind of glib sorry that we throw around quite readily in society. I'm sorry, whatever. People say sorry quite easily. But if you genuinely want forgiveness and you reflect that, you can also, the person asking for it can get quite a lot from it as well. So I think it can also still be a two-way transaction, is what I'm really saying. It's not necessarily the person who's doing the forgiving that gets the most out of it. In the example where the person, the accident, and the lady gave the person forgiveness, whether or not that person responded or accepted was irrelevant to her. She was giving up her side. But if that person themselves had asked for forgiveness and they desperately needed it because they respected the other person, then it can be quite important. So it is a social kind of remedy to our own kind of psyches, I suppose. It's so I do think it can work.
Sorry, you were going to ask a question.
No,
there's another little element to this that I wrote in my intro, but which I haven't yet covered, and that is that one can negate the whole need for forgiveness if one never took offense in the first place. So if someone says, "Oh, please forgive me for doing this," and you say, "Sorry, I can't," and they say, "Oh, please, but why not?" You say, "Well, I really never took offense, so there's nothing really to forgive." That's also a magnanimous side of the aggressor, to rise above this and transcend it, and to say, "This never had an effect on me. This is your stuff. You made a mistake. I never took this on. I'm like a Teflon pan with a fried egg that doesn't stick. This never stuck. It just slid right off me. I let it go long ago. No need for forgiveness. Free yourself. Forgive yourself. Move on."
Yeah, exactly. And then the other sort of interesting potentially rat's nest topic, which we don't have to delve into deeply, but it's part of forgiveness, is when there's kind of societies that ask for forgiveness. So it could be a massacre that's occurred, or a huge social ill that's occurred from one kind of dominant culture to another, or situation where there's been various around the world over the centuries of these examples, and then there can be a kind of a view that there is a forgiveness for that act, or there's a request for forgiveness, or forgiveness is given to allow the whole thing to move forward. And I've always wondered about that, because it's usually spoken about and conceived in different groups, like leadership groups, you can call it that, or representatives of that society. And sometimes, as you know, representative societies are not necessarily representative. They're just sort of sometimes self-appointed, and sometimes are kind of sort of democratically elected, and democracy's got its own issues. So then, there's this kind of concept of forgiveness, but the actual individual in that situation, be the aggrieved or the aggressor, what do they get out of that? Because it's so abstract from where they are. There's this kind of concept of, we forgive you, but what does it mean to each party?
You know what, Pete? The past is the past. We cannot change it ever, no matter what was done in the past. All we can do is we can either bring that past experience constantly into this moment, in which case it pollutes this moment, or you let that past experience go and you take the wisdom out of it, the learning out of it, and you apply the wisdom, the learning to this moment to make this moment better and freer. So in that context, we've got the great example of the transition from old apartheid, the collapse of apartheid, into the new South Africa, and Mandela's sort of stance on that. Now, I don't know if that was forgiveness, or if that, how that worked, but it could have gone in multiple different directions. But there was a kind of a relatively peaceful handover, and I think that could only have occurred when there was a letting go of what had happened before, and the intention of moving into a fresh, clean space.
Yeah. So I think, and that's the other part of this concept of forgiveness, is that kind of thing, which is also quite interesting now. But yep, it is a complex concept, and I'm not sure that in fact, some people quite like to harbor a bit of resentment because it gives them some energy. You know, so if all the jokes about relationships to go wrong, and there's so many examples of quite funny jokes about that, where, I mean, obviously not funny if you're in it and it's happening to you, but you know, the whole thing there is that it can be quite useful to use that aggression to go, well, okay, I'm not going to forgive you and I'm going to take you out, okay? So, like, I mean, the one with example, like you sort of destroy an item of that person. So I don't know, the one book I read, I think the person dumped a load of sewage in somebody's kind of cabriolet sort of coupe car, you see, in response to this bad behavior, which was certainly not forgiving that person at all. It was responding aggressively. And perhaps forgiveness sometimes is overrated, and it's quite good to do that. I mean, maybe you get into trouble for it. But maybe sometimes better not to forgive.
Yeah, that's kind of the eye for an eye principle, hey?
Yeah.
And the whole legal justice system is sort of based on that idea of an eye for an eye. You know, you break the speed limit, you pay the fine. You know, you kill somebody,
there's no forgiveness.
You know, it's just, there's no forgiveness in the legal justice system. But there's an idea of maybe rehabilitation or, you know, restitution in some sense. But yeah, is true forgiveness limited only to the social context between human beings, or does it find a place in the greater society? Is there any room anywhere for forgiveness in the legal system? Apparently not. And so when two businesses clash with one another in that business context, is there forgiveness in that sense when one is you know, outdone the other in some sense, or do you take it to you know, down the legal route and sue each other for you know, for retribution, recompense? What happens in that corporate sense between business and business when they come into loggerheads? What happens in the legal justice system, and what happens between employees and business, or business and employees? And I see Katie put up a message here about you know, finding forgiveness when occasional lines are crossed, and true learning happens. Can the business or the member of staff, or, you know, whoever it is, can they not find some learning experience out of that? And I'm sure there always is a learning experience. One must gain wisdom out of this. One has to either refine the processes, adjust things so that it comes down to what we've spoken about before, and that is about fairness. I think my yardstick in life has sort of come down to this one thing, and that is about fairness. My interaction with you, does it center around fairness? Because if it is, it's going to be noble, it's going to be friendly, it's going to be one person honoring the other. If I'm in a restaurant, all I'm looking for when my meal is served is that it's fair. It's fair price, it's fair value, it's fairly presented with, you know, and wherever I go, I think it's not so much in my world about how much I pay or what I do or what I get. It's, do I walk out of that experience feeling as though some kind of fairness has happened? And if it's not, I don't know to what degree I'd be pushed where I could still allow forgiveness to occur. I mean, I've thrown little temper tantrums in the spa because the cashier was just disgustingly, you know, hideous. And I walk out of there and I think, oh, Tom, you know, did you have to make such a fuss, make such an idiot of yourself? When all I could have looked at her was saying, oh, I hope that makes you feel better. And then just walk out, you know?
Yeah, I'm sure that's forgiveness though. Yeah, I mean, definitely in the innovation space and in the business, I think there's a lot of space, and there often is a lot of loosely spoken about forgiveness, in a sense that, you know, you make a mistake as a techie, or you make a mistake in terms of how you did something, or in a spec or whatever, in a update. That happens all the time, and there is forgiveness. Obviously, if you're a serial mistake maker and you're really not trying to improve yourself, then the forgiveness tends to kind of diminish from your colleagues, because they're going, you know, you're making us work harder, yeah, because, you know, I keep him to do something. I also find that people that are typically in businesses like ours, you know, are usually, you know, really enjoying that kind of environment and wanting to do well and working hard together, and that's recognized. So therefore, the fact that everybody knows this was happening is that they're quite happy with the edges of mistakes, because it's part of going forward, and there's forgiveness for that, I guess. So yeah, I think there it's I think in a business that maybe is more kind of pure process, and obviously got a lot of process in our business, but I'm thinking more like a production line kind of concept, where, you know, you've got to do the same thing and you've got to do it and do it and do it, and there's no innovation whatsoever. And there perhaps there's quite a stringent KPI, and there's no forgiveness, because, you know, if you put the widget in the wrong way, then the whole thing breaks, and I guess you probably get fired after doing that twice. So,
I remember one 5 to 12, and I deleted an entire live corporate database, and I got such a fright that I went for lunch. And then sauntered back, all nonchalant, you know. Chaos. And then I was so smitten with conscience that I had to own up. That's the greatest thing to do 2 hours after the event, you know.
Yeah, so even when people don't know that you did it, you still ask for forgiveness. Yeah. Yeah, I did something similar once. I deleted it was a compression thing way back in the days of I was working in the IBM mainframe world, and I didn't know what this thing was, but it was it was called ICE, but it was a compression thing. It was actually compressing the library of source code, and I was the junior developer on call, and this thing was running and running, and I was like, it just wasn't ending, so I just killed it, not realizing that if you did that, you lost, that library disappeared. So, yeah, so so I wasn't very popular. So these things happen
where one there's no point in you know, you bring the person to task, and it'd be nice for the confession, albeit 2.5 hours late, you know, but you get the rap on the knuckles, you learn from your mistakes, and you move on. I think it's where there's an element of unfairness in this, and we come back again to that word. If this is somebody just pulling the ring out of it, then, you know, one has to then maybe go down the discipline route rather than down the forgiveness route. That's an interesting
absolutely
debate. This.
It is, yeah. We have another question here, which is, how do you manage a situation where someone does not forgive? I'm assuming this is where you actually would like the forgiveness, but you don't get it.
Yeah. That can people can withhold forgiveness for a variety of different reasons. First of all, that withholding forgiveness leaves them in the place of being the victim, and there are lots of people who thrive on being in the victim mode because it's their way of getting secondary gain. Primary gain is if I work for my money and I get my salary at the end of the month. That's my primary gain. Secondary gain is I milk a situation like this. I withhold forgiveness. I do not let the person off the hook. I keep reminding them of their transgressions, and I keep putting myself in the victim mode. Why? Because I benefit greatly from that. I get sympathy. I can sell my story to all my friends. Everyone's giving me hugs and kisses and telling me that they feel very sorry for me, until I milk it too long, and then they get bored with it, and then I don't get the sympathy anymore. Then I need to find something new. But there are people that thrive on that, and they will not let this. They will never offer that forgiveness, because it adds something. It adds something to them. I love your invisible water, by the way. You drink it and it disappears.
It's quite amazing, yeah.
This magic elixir. No more Pete. So So there are people that will do that. It's maybe vindictive because it's sort of payback. There's an element of payback. Pay for your sins, you bugger. Or it is their need not to step out of this and get into a fresh space where they can reboot up life, because then they lose all of that essence that they can get, all of that sympathy and that pity that they can get from others. That's sad. It's a sad thing.
And lever.
Yes.
So if I don't forgive you, I can use it against you. Not just get sympathy. I can manipulate you now.
Yeah. That's a tit for tat kind of attribution never really works. It's that pouring.
So how do you manage? So how do you manage that? Sorry to interrupt you.
Nice within yourself, just to know that you don't need to validate yourself through somebody else's pity for you. Can't you validate yourself, rise above this, and just move on?
But I would say if I'm asking you, Tom, for forgiveness and you refuse to give it, what I need to do ultimately, I suppose, is recognize your motives for not forgiving me, and then take it from there. So if for example, it's what you're saying in the situation, you're not forgiving me because you're keeping yourself in a happy place because you can get pity from everybody else, then what I have to recognize is that is the situation, and I must recognize that I have to forgive myself at a level and move on, because I'm never going to get it from you. Yeah.
Instead of reciprocating tit for tat, then what happens here is you reciprocate to that withholding of forgiveness by offering forgiveness for the withholding of forgiveness. Oh, well, I forgive you for that. If that's the way you want to hold on to this, then I'm going to set myself free and move. Then it's a unilateral.
Yeah.
What can I do?
Yeah.
Here we go. Bye. Forgive you. Bye.
Yeah. Well, alternatively, you do the eye for the eye one, or the double eye. You double up and you do it again. Sorry, I shouldn't say these things. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we have no more questions, and I think we've explored that. And thank you very much. I really enjoyed the Polynesian. What's it called again? Hapani. Yeah, that one. That's a very interesting concept. That's like
we're digging into the backstory of it. It's quite an interesting concept. It's interesting to think people long ago had that kind of mindset. That's quite refreshing.
Yeah, it is very refreshing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. For everybody. Let's hope that this marks the end of 2020 and the 2021 is a kind of a fresh new start. And that we can forgive coronavirus for everything that it did.
Let's hope so. But thank you very much for all your time and all your input over this last year. We've certainly enjoyed the webinars, and really appreciate it. Thank you.
Carry them on into the new year.
We will do. Thank you.
Go well. Enjoy. See ya.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you very much.